Welcome everyone to another Cryptowriter Round Table, where Corey, Cottrell, and I usually, interview really interesting people about interesting topics. However, Corey is on a sailboat somewhere, much needed use and reprieve from crazy, hectic markets up and down and things going on in the space. So. I lost my better half in this situation, but I decided to recruit someone even better for a very special episode, which we're pretty excited about. We're going to be talking about blockchain and the environment. And so I've pulled in a recent new friend of mine, Chris Tuttle, who I kind of work closely with, and she does amazing things in the blockchain space. But what I like about her the most is that she just loves bees, and I think that's really cool. We have Yoshi down below me, who you might know if you follow our channel over on the Uplifters, as the man behind Yoshi Drops, which is trying to essentially put music and NFTs and artists together to create this really cool new age concept where a majority of the funding will actually go towards partnership agreements with companies like carbonfund.org to plant like basically a shit ton of trees, and make the Wax blockchain carbon positive as opposed to just carbon neutral. Let that sink in, right? No pun intended, but I'll roll with it. And we have Stefan, who comes very highly recommended to us from a friend of ours over at Cryptowriter Podcast, Jillian. And Stefan is, I guess, what I read about you that really made me smile, because it kind of reminds me of a good friend of ours on Blue. But basically, you want to save the earth and make money. I think that's pretty amazing, right? Like, so yeah. So I guess that's our introduction from my end, but maybe we'll just do a quick, one-off, from an environmental standpoint, like what are you passionate about and why do you love it? So maybe we can start with Tuttle or Chris, if you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been pretty passionate about environmental stewardship. I was the co-chair of the Invasive Species Council's Garry Oak ecosystem team here on the island for a couple of years, and did a university degree in biology focused on plant biotechnology. And so after that, I actually did a startup company that was attempting to remove invasive species using RNA as a method of weed control, where you could tune the RNA to kill a specific weed while leaving the rest of the environment unharmed, because RNA is basically food and super biodegradable. We did some great stuff with that, got a patent out. We wound up selling to another company here in Vancouver not that long ago. And so then I had a long non-compete period where I was able to get back into blockchain, which has always been one of my side passions. I mined some Bitcoin way back in like 2011, late 2010, early 2011 to heat our house. We had a couple of computers running, and we just, so in some ways that was a bit of an environmental venture because we, didn't want to waste all that heat. And it's always been, an interesting question that I've had as to like whether or not that, like, I think it's just free money in that case if you're mining to heat your house, right? Because the heat is waste anyway at that point, and I don't think you're losing anything to the crypto process itself. So that was fun. And so then, I used some of that Bitcoin, wound up getting back into the NFT space here, and found my way over to the Uplift. So it's been great, but now I've got a chance to sort of, like, the non-compete period is over, I'm a little more stable here, and I'd like to start integrating my passions and, join some of this biotech and blockchain together a bit.
Oh, very cool. And Stefan, so if you don't know Stefan, you were the CEO and founder of Bitcoin.com, and now you work for, I think it's Sonic. Is it? And you're the co-founder of that as well. So if you wouldn't mind, kind of tuning us in on what you do.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, just to clarify, I was the CEO of Bitcoin.com. I wasn't actually the founder. But I ran it, and we grew it from 2 million users wallets to 12 million users. So we really scaled it. We launched an exchange, credit card, and all of that, and saw that growth in the bare winter, right? We went straight through that whole winter period, straight through the colossal downfall, sort of led by the current leaders of the planet, if you will, for lack of a better name, that decided COVID needed to drive everything to a grinding halt, which ultimately led to a lot of wealth depletion, but then again, wealth creation. And sort of why I got into the whole environment space, what I'm passionate about, I'm an outdoors guy. I love the outdoors. I love the mountains. I grew up in the mountains. I was very fortunate as a kid to be able to sail the oceans and work as crew on boats, scuba dive, see the underwater world, the colors that were there, and see huge whales and all of that. And I'd love for my children to be able to experience that as well. And so that's sort of the altruistic side. And I believe that in order to attract the best talent into this industry, to really help really change the way the planet is governed, we need to create monetizable opportunities for the youth to want to work in this space and really make a change, and thereby make money as a result out of it. Because if there's no money, we're not going to attract the best talent. They're all going to work on figuring out how we fly to Mars before they actually figure out how we save the planet, how we save the human race for survival on this planet without having to walk around in hazmat suits.
I mean, or figure out how to create the next Facebook. I mean,
yeah, or that's.
I want to put a pin in that because there's something there that I really
definitely.
But let's get to Yoshi first, because I think like what you brought up was a really good point. So I do want to come back to that. But yeah, one of my favorite people probably on the planet recently is Yoshi. Yoshi he's a bit of a mystery. Yeah, give us your introduction, your short and sweet introduction there, Yoshi, because like I kind of feel like in a way you're my brother on the other side of the world. So let her rip.
Hi guys. Yeah, Jimmy is my brother from different country, right? Because I consider Jimmy as like Japanese too, because he's been there longer than I have been. But my name's Yoshi, and I'm a big fan of NFT space. I have been in the music industry for past 20 years, and my passion is to merge those two industries and just to align it with what you guys are doing, because I think the environmental cause is one of the most important things. I think that we have to figure out as a human society as a whole. So, yeah, it's very important to me as well.
So, hi, my name's Jimmy D, and I'm an environmentalist. I think the first article that I ever wrote in the blockchain space was an article that looked at the parallels between blockchain and permaculture. And if you don't know what permaculture is, it's smart design of ecosystems to maximize the already inherent potential in the land. What a lot of agriculture does is it goes in there and it flattens it to start out from like a square one, where we can look at it from a scientific perspective and we can build it up in the way that we want to. What permaculture does is it looks at the land and it says, okay, well, if you want to grow tomatoes and tomatoes don't grow here, then go buy a new piece of land. or reformat the land, come in here with big machines and figure out ways to trap water and to create microenvironments that can support the conditions out of this. And so I personally saw a lot of parallels between permaculture and blockchain, because they were both decentralized. They were both looking at maximizing the potential. They were both looking at using the landscape and the environment to make something more. And that was my first article, and I didn't know very much about blockchain at the time. And I kind of got into it. And when I found out that Tuttle was interested in bees, my mind was blown. Because like my favorite thing about bees is people say, oh, we don't want to keep bees, but you know what? The people that don't want to keep bees are afraid of being stung. But all you have to do is put bees on the roof of your house and you will never see them because they will fly right over your head, right? And it goes into that idea of smart design, right? A lot of times we're afraid of the wilderness and we're afraid of these things. And as Yoshi knows, Japan has this image of being a concrete jungle. When people think of Japan, they think of Tokyo, they think of this massive like city of the future that's all concrete. But about probably anywhere from 80 to 85% of Japan is green mountain forest that nobody ever goes to. It's one of the most greenest countries on earth, without a doubt. It's not the biggest. It's not the most natural. But it is one of the most greenest, right? I studied permaculture in Australia and in New Zealand. And it's funny because when I was listening to you talk, Stefan, I don't know where you're from, but I'm guessing you're from that area of the world. I mean, mountains and sailing, New Zealand is the only place that I know that you can do that in a single day.
I couldn't do it in a single day. I was, but I did sail around the New Zealand islands, and New Zealand is an amazingly beautiful country. But I'm actually originally I'm Swiss by passport, and I went to school and university in Switzerland, but I was actually born and raised in Hong Kong. And then I also have some Scottish blood in me. So I have a bit of everything, sort of a bit of a mix, a global generation, I guess, in some way. That's sort of my background.
Okay, fair enough. One of the things I really like about New Zealand personally is New Zealand is the only country on the planet that I know that actually pays people to keep trees.
Yeah.
If you have trees on your farm, the government will give you money to keep them there instead of cutting them down and getting a one-time fee, which to me is nuts. Because I was talking to Chris yesterday about the old growth forest problem that they're having in North America right now. In Canada, the governments are cutting down these massive old growth forests, right? For the lumber, and it's just crazy, right? Like I was a tree planter in Canada, right? And like Yoshi's whole thing is like, let's plant trees. So I want to go back to what you were talking about before, Stefan, and I want to reference another really good friend of mine and of ours, M-Blue. And M-Blue, when he started out with this organization called Uplift Nation a while ago, what he and I wanted to do, and a few other people that were involved, was we wanted to make charities accountable, and we wanted to put charity on the blockchain. Yeah. And what we figured out was that that's not so easy. Because in order to hire high-profile talent, they don't want to come and work for an NPO, for an NGO, for a nonprofit organization, right? Like these people who are making like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year because they're the top of their class, they can actually contribute more to the cause by working and donating those funds than they can for working for these companies. And what you mentioned in your kind of introductory speech triggered that in my mind. So I kind of want to hear people's opinions on that, because in your own rights, you're all kind of industry leaders. And that's the thing. What you want to do is you want to make it profitable for people to see the value in environmentalism and to have this as a job, right? And if you'd like to expand upon that, and then I'd like to kind of get Yoshi and Chris's comments as well, because I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I mean, my view is that, we pay for harvesting our resources, right? So we have gold mines, we pay to harvest and extract all the gold out of the land that we sit on. And we, in all sorts of fashions and ways, we pay people to chop down trees, but we don't actually pay people or pay individuals for cultivating, for planting seeds, for farming, right? We only pay for the harvest. Why can we not pay for the actual farming? How do we convert that? How do we automate that? How do we provide a governance model around that? It doesn't need to be perfect from day one, but it can always evolve, and we can refine it over time to get to an area where we're all happy and we get to carbon zero. We hear day in, day out, every day another company is going to go carbon zero by XYZ day, right? And there's I love this. If I can share my screen, there's which screen am I sharing? Here, I'm going to share this screen. There's an interesting element here that was put together by the sort of visual capitalist. And so all of these companies, Fortune 500 companies, have made these statements. 163 of the Fortune 500s all want to go carbon neutral by a certain period of time. And that can vary between 2025, 2030, 2050, whatever that target is. And I think, to your point, we're back at sort of square one. How are we going to hold them accountable to that? And I think hopefully today we can actually educate the generations to decide which products to purchase from which companies that are acting and hitting the goals that they set themselves to do. And thanks to cryptocurrencies, we actually are empowering individuals with dollars that allows them to fund that. Thanks to NFTs, we can actually trace back how they are acting and if they are in compliance with their statements. So there's a lot of new technologies, and it's governed by multiple participants anywhere on the planet, so that it is literally no one person can actually state that I am carbon zero. We can actually follow it, and the ledger, which is the accountability tracker, is actually doing that for us, held by multiple different parties.
So when thinking about that, like my experience with trying to like shop out a new technology that has significant environmental benefits was constantly getting stopped at the capital stage, like with venture capital, at the needing to prove not just a cost to the environment, not just a financial cost to farmers or to other people, but a specific spend. Because it's always about how do we redirect current revenue towards this. We don't want to prove that we have to carve out a new market, especially when that new market might involve environmental sensitivities that way. And I heard you talking about things like, people will hopefully be educated to buy the right products, but like, I seem to see this setup where like the combination of companies trying to maximize shareholder value and there being routes, right, that you can take to like, buy carbon credits, offset things that, like you say, we're getting to this point where maybe there's a big divorce from the actual products and that environmental connection. And I'm wondering, like, how do you get things funded that may be less tangibly connected that way? How do you convince companies to do what you were talking about like paying people to work on farming and not just on the results as well? Like how do you get that change going?
I think there are two elements to that. One is, thanks to the tokenomics and the ability to issue tokens, you can actually get them straight to relevant people that have an interest in doing this and buying your tokens right away. So I, as a consumer, can buy regen tokens and thereby empowering the individuals to attract the talent to grow the team. And maybe I'm not going to provide, the $10 million that, let's say, a Facebook can raise or other companies can raise. But in the early stages, they don't need that 10 million. They can go with 1 or 2 million. And hopefully we can pool enough of us interested parties that are fortunate enough to be able to allocate a $5,000, $1,000, $10,000, $100,000 check to help them get off the ground and launch it. And I found that has been super empowering. So venture capital is no longer, thanks to blockchain and tokenomics, is no longer limited to only the set few venture capitalists that have managed to raise big funds to deploy them, but it's actually now consumerized. So we can all participate in venture investments.
That makes sense to me, and I'm a huge fan of the DAOs that have been evolving over the last year or so. Like I've participated in like the Curve and Balancer stuff, and have been following Metacartel and this stuff. It's just neat to watch it all evolve. And one of the things that I've been hoping to do next year, finances permitting, is get a little piece of land that I can start a small research apiary on. And the plan around that is to sell the beehives as NFTs. So to try to get the community involved in buying an NFT that represents one of each of the actual hives in the apiary. And so then ideally we'll figure out a way of, a redemption or rewards process where people could maybe access things like the honey, but like mostly this would be about people proving their, putting skin in the game, having a beehive without necessarily having a beehive, and then trusting somebody else to manage it in a research-oriented context. And, I think, there's might be some neat roles for NFTs in the future to, try to get those qualitative benefits where like tokens are still a lot more ledger based and a lot more quantitative, but yeah.
And you couple that with sort of decentralized Oracle services, right? That can help verify and validate. We now all walk around with mobile phones in our pockets. Those then allow people to take pictures to support the verification and run that through Oracle services that I think are only going to further help validate and provide that traceability that those beehives are actually, or that honey is actually coming from the beehives that are on your roof. And right? So
that's actually a very interesting connection with the Oracle services, because I've thought about blockchain for things like resources, like back before I really understood what was going on with Ethereum and the ICO, because I was doing other work at the time. I had been brainstorming and talking about it with a friend, and we talked about like how you could maybe use tokens so that like if my fruit tree was in flower or in bloom, or sorry, in full fruit, I could have tokens for the duration of time that fruit is there, or have a way of people, using tokens to represent that and distribute those resources. But with oracles and things like honey, like you don't want to necessarily ship that honey, right? Like if I have people all over the world that are participating in this project, they may want honey, they may want to share in the resources, but they may not need the honey from that farm. But what they would want is honey that is being verified to be produced in the same way, that's not adulterated with sugars, that's maybe undergone NMR testing, and so you could have a blockchain verified system there that allows people to access similar honey, or like similarly ethical or similarly sourced honey, without it being a geographic, shipping, or logistical issue too. So
well, and you bring up an interesting point there, I think, as well. Like I've often thought about this and the factor with blockchain, right? Like a lot of environmental projects. I'm sorry, but I'm going to say a lot of environmental projects, especially in certain states or in certain regions of the world, fall on deaf ears because people aren't interested in that, right? And like Europe, for example, right? Like Europe is very environmentally open compared to like some of the other regions in the world, right? New Zealand as well. So what if you could have this system? Because what we're mostly in this little huddle here. We're mostly predominantly fans of Wax. Don't mention Ethereum to Yoshi because he'll get really angry. He's like, no, but like we're fans of Wax for a reason, right? But like we're pretty much pro blockchain. But one of the benefits of NFTs that are possible on Wax that is never utilized is the fact that you can back tokens with you can back NFTs with token value, right? Like you can create an NFT and you can back it with EOS, or you can back it with Wax. And that NFT sits there like that until it's burned. Now, what if we turn the whole world of investing in projects on its head? What if like Chris's honey farm had these tokens that went out that represented like a backing or an ownership of that beehive on the roof, per se, right? And when the profits came in, a certain percent of those profits were then redistributed and sent out and backed all of these NFTs, right? And then those NFTs would hold their value. They'd be tradable on the open market for the value that they represented or the perceived value. But there's a way there for international like communities to rally around or behind a cause that often happens, but they have no avenue to be able to support it. And if they want, to back a project and fund a project, then they can still get their funding back out of it by essentially just burning the NFTs and taking their value. That was a really sharp turn there.
No, that makes really good sense, and it's connected to one thing. Like I got started and sort of made a living for myself in the NFT space breeding axes over on the Ethereum chain, and they became high value because of the play to earn side of things, and it's a couple of $100 an axie to build a team, and you need 3 of them to build a team, and as a result, they've held value in a way that other like art NFTs are still a little bit more volatile. And so there's a lot of lending platforms built around Axes now. Like there's Mystic Axes that you can get loans on. There's a a decentralized lending platform called AxieTree where people can contract submit and then contract borrow and rent Axes right from it. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Like the same kind of over collateralized loans that you saw on the token side of things can happen in the NFT space if there's the right kind of curation on it. And especially with NFTs that have utility, like these environmentally linked ones that we're talking about, there's no reason that 80,000 Yoshi coins couldn't have a fixed bottom and a fixed upper value, and a loan couldn't be issued on that could help a startup doing something in the environmental space, right? There's some potentials here that are, yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah,
so good. Chris,
yeah,
Chris
so Yoshi,
genius.
tell us about your Yoshi coins, because some people out there might not know what's going on. So I want to ask you two questions just to take this segue, and so number one, why do you believe that what you're doing with NFTs can save the world by planting trees? It sounds like a really weird question, but I think it's a valid question, right? Like you're planning on planting like over 2 million trees by 2023, right? Like this is the game plan, and I think we're gonna blow that out of the water if I'm 100% honest about it, right? Like, and you're doing that through funding like artists and music and creativity. So I want you to expand upon your vision a little bit and explain it.
To be honest, this is a message, right? It's a conversation starter. That one thing that I can do to show the world with the amazing technology like NFT is I can just say the simplest thing, like, hey, let's plant a tree because we all want to breathe in the future for our kids, right? So it's a conversation starter for everyone to say, hey, look at this guy is planting tree using NFTs, and so maybe I don't want to use too much plastic then, I want everybody to do their part. And I think we all know this, even the children in the world know this. It's like we're facing imminent danger, like serious situation where there's no certain like way to turn back or turn around certain situation, because we built the whole society around consuming fossil fuel, right? We build more oil we burn, more money we can generate, and more job we can generate, right? And I'm not an anti-oil per se, because we can live longer in medicine and all the technological advance because of the oil. But now we have this gift. We should be able to survive off of just killing ourselves. So I don't know. I think we all know what we need to do, but it's so hard to not stop doing, the things that we're so used to. It's like, I don't know. We can be so serious and so, specific about stuff, but it's end of the day, it's kind of like a simple, but it's really hard to fix this, right? Because everybody got to do it. And some people have a livelihood, some people have their money, some people have family taken care of, because it's all this intertwined, right? It's all locked in.
How much do you feel is driven? Sorry just to ask a question, but I mean, I think what you're doing and what we're all trying to do is really innovate, right? And we're trying to change the way we are governed and the way we are managing and operating on this planet, right? And in that, how much I always feel that everything we want to do and really want to change is limited by some sort of new regulation or law or existing government body that is doing something and won't let anybody else come into that role.
Stefan, I don't think I know, like, it's, I think we all can say it's government and regulation. Yeah, it is, right? You're not lying about that. Yep. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, in this country, United States, we burn billions of gallons of oil to just train the bomber right? That
Yeah.
we fly the train to how to bomb just in case of national security. We burn billions of gallons. Listen, I'm saying I'm not anti-army or anti-anything, right? I love my country, and I love the armies and the support of national security. But at the end of the day, it's a trust thing. It's like
Yeah.
we can't trust that country and this country because they run this and they run that. We need to fly a bomber every day, make sure we have have a strategically in a better place when the conflict happens, right? So
I do love that you're suggesting a decentralized army. That is a
no, I'm
fascinating.
not saying. Oh no, Chris, don't.
Well, you know,
put words in my mouth.
XRP call
Don't
their
put words in my mouth.
community
No,
the
no, no.
XRP
No.
army, right?
We want the peace, right? We want the peace, world peace, and we want the stability of the business and economy. We all want that, right? But
Yeah.
we can
Well, and
do
I
it
think
in a smarter way.
exactly, and I think that might be like I joke about the army side of things, but I think what you were sort of saying there is like if these sort of things are in the control of any one like small group of people, like a government or whatever, they tend to get used a little unilaterally. Whereas if this sort of thing was spread out or decentralized,
I mean, so if I can trust you and where you're from enough so that I gotta fly $1 billion worth of flying every day just to train, just in case, I
Yeah.
think we got some big problems, right?
Right?
You know?
But jumping back to regulatory stuff for a second, I agree. And like when I was getting into the stuff, like this was an RNA-based invasive species removal tool, right? But it's a herbicide, right? It kills a plant. And as a result, like the regulatory landscape is incredibly murky, right? And a traditional new active herbicide is about $1 billion to get through regulation, and that's after you've sort of done the basic testing to prove that it works and it's safe enough. And I don't know, like, I disagree with that, but I don't think that a lot of this regulation was necessarily a result of the government, right? This is an issue with regulatory capture and lobbying as well, and it's been a vicious cycle for a long time. And like, I'm a big fan of the phrase adversarial interoperability. It's one of the things that we've seen happen recently with things like the DMCA, where like, a company will get established by figuring out how to interoperate adversarially with another company, and will, leech, we saw with like SushiSwap and Uniswap doing a vampire attack of the liquidity, like it goes back to Facebook doing data scraping, right? And then they lock it off in some way. But then not only do they lock off that data they got, but they lobby to try to get a regulation in place that prevents anyone else from accessing the same paths that they used, right? And this was the herbicide companies trying to put like stronger regulatory situations in place. Like Monsanto lobbied for a lot of the regulatory structures that they're dealing with because they can afford it and other people can't, right? And this is where, like, again, if we can deregulate, or like if we can democratize things like the regulatory industry, then there's no spot for a single lobbyist to come through and do all of this. But there's a big gap between here and there, and I don't think that necessarily full-on deregulation is going to fix things in the interim, because like at the same time we've got all this surplus energy still. It's obvious how much it's costing the environment, but there's always going to be people willing to exploit that for shorter term gain, and I'm not sure how you like employ a regulatory system that can stop that and help us transition to something different without seeming harsh on some people. So I don't know, that's just my dump on it. But
yeah, no, I mean, I mean, partially, the blockchain is, and these smart contracts do provide a governance module, right? I mean, they have governance embedded in the code in terms of how the relationships are established and managed between parties, right? And so there is definitely a way to minimize and put into the blockchain how we should be governing certain elements, and you can then see where the users go to and where the appreciation of a token goes towards. That is definitely something the community and the society is interested in seeing change happen.
No, that makes sense. And like I noticed when I was doing when I was looking at the regulatory landscape, like as far as basic testing and stuff of these things go, like for a lot of scientific things, you can do a lot of stuff by yourself, right? It's just as soon as you've started up a company, you have employees, you've got like a focused path, regulatory stuff becomes more pressing. But like, again, the democratization of the blockchain stuff could allow a lot of people to do their own sort of work and the data to be accumulated in a way that matters, just like we sort of saw with amateur astronomy, and that sort of stuff didn't require the blockchain, but some of this, more interesting technical stuff might.
Yeah.
Jimmy. Yeah.
How do you spell murky?
MURKY.
I thought it was CKY. Okay, thank you. I mean, that answers my question. That's pretty much what I was thinking about, just because I just really wanted to do this. Because, I love irony and puns. The regulatory landscape on herbicide is incredibly murky. I concur.
Yeah.
I might have twisted that a little bit. But, I think, so here's the thing, right? I kind of don't have a plan for where we're headed, because I don't know where we're headed. For once, I actually don't know where we're headed on the show. I don't know where we're headed, but you guys are talking about the ability to track things on the blockchain, right? And the ability to do things on the blockchain. One of the things I love about what Yoshi Coins and Yoshi Drops is doing is that they're by the way, Yoshi, I like when you're angry. I've never seen that before. That was fun. I think one of my things that I took from permaculture is you need to build a model for change. And we can do this in many ways.
The biker gang.
Yes, the Bosozoku. I mean, they're all over. They're these little biker gangs that like to rev their engines in the town. Pretend that they're going fast, but actually they're not moving. So one of these things that I think that is really an interesting concept is we're in such early beginning days of blockchain, especially. So nobody knows what's really going to happen. So I kind of want to know what you guys think are the applications. Tracking is great, right? But what are the applications beyond tracking things, right? Beyond being able, because you even expanded upon that earlier, Stefan, I think a little bit, when you talked about, how we can make, I think it was you, but how we can make companies accountable, how we can see this on chain, right? But what are other applications? I like Yoshi's funding mechanism to be able to use art and NFTs to be able to actually plant trees. But I think that there's so much further that we can go. And how could we employ the power that exists in blockchain to be able to make environmentalism cool in a way? I don't know if you've ever watched, the TED Talk by, called The Gangster Gardener. It's great if you've never watched it. It's about a guy who lives in California, and basically he looks around South Central LA and he says, this is screwed. I got to drive an hour and a half to get a fresh apple. And he says the problem with growing your own food is that it's not cool. So he's basically turned gardening gangster, and he's like, if you want to talk to me, you come to my plot and you join me with a shovel and let's plant some shit. And the beautiful thing about this is he's doing it with homeless people. He's doing it in homeless shelters. He's ripping out the parkway in the middle of the street, and he's growing food for his community. And this doesn't always happen. And this is why I love permaculture. This is why I love that aspect. But I think it goes both ways. And a lot of times in blockchain, we get lost in the
tracking,
in the hype of how. Sorry, go ahead. But yeah, in the hype of how much money we can make, as opposed to how much good it could do. And I'm just curious, especially from Stefan, but everyone else, what can blockchain bring to this industry that it couldn't achieve without it? Because we don't need a token for everything, but some people think that we do, right?
No, I mean, I think we brought up the points earlier on, right? I mean, we don't need a token for everything, but we do provide democratization. We can provide accountability. We can provide the traceability, the verification. All of that can be made transparent. And ultimately, we hold accountable a lot of these false statements that are made in flippantly by some press release, and then it's forgotten a year later because of a certain action or a certain event that occurred to distract everybody from that commitment, right? And let's face it, I mean, in 10 years' time, I mean, the world's going to be so different in 10 years' time. I mean, go back a year and a half. I mean, we would never have thought we'd gone down through 6 months or 12 months or 18 months of lockdown. I mean, it's like it would have been unheard of, right? And here we are. What's going to happen in 18 months? We have no idea. And that the velocity of innovation and change and the amount of printing of money, we have no idea where this is going to land. But we are creative as a human species, though. That I will give us. We are survivors. We are innovative. And when we get under pressure, we actually perform extremely well.
Maybe to follow up on exactly that point, I think you're totally right. We are creative and we do, perform extremely well when that happens. I think that one of the issues is that we don't coordinate very well, right? This is something that I've learned a lot when I've been following the Gitcoin and, documents and stuff. I really like what Gitcoin has been trying to do and develop with their stuff. And they talk a lot about, Moloch, the god of coordination failures or whatever it is, and about trying to build better coordination between people. And I think about, corporations were our first real attempt at that kind of coordination, and they have major limitations. Obviously, they have centralization issues. They have power distribution issues. They have weird fiduciary sinkholes that become problematic. But things like the blockchain can allow for scale-free coordination that might enable all of us to take actions that are similarly large to the actions these multinational corporations can take, but without the surrounding infrastructure and cruft and a lot of that other things. Like, I was thinking while you were talking with the Yoshi coins about tree planting, for example, right? Like, here we've got all these big tree planting lease lots, right? And they're owned by the big forestry companies, and they go through with the government and they work out deals where they basically cycle and clear cut these whole patches and rotate it through. And as a result, no forest gets very old, right? They all eventually get chopped down. And so we don't have a chance for the environment to ever mature into something new. If instead you imagine people could buy tokens for each tree that's being planted, and then coordinate through a DAO where when there's the decision that enough paper needs to be produced or enough product needs to be produced, everyone who needs money at the time could burn their tokens, but a certain subset of those trees could then be harvested based on what makes the most sense at the time. You could coordinate in a way that these companies can't even do, right? Because you'd have stakeholders involved that hold these tokens across the whole place, and the token price would help give insight on whether it's necessary to harvest, right? Instead of just doing a rotating schedule. So, yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up the business aspect of that for me, because I'm not on the business side, but I see the value in that. I'm actually on the other side, like the decision government side, and I kind of feel like now we've got all of this lands, especially in countries like Canada, where I think something like 80% is unoccupied that belongs to the state or belongs to the country, and we have these people that we vote into power that just make decisions on it. They decide whether an oil pipeline is going to run through somewhere, or they decide whether these resources are going to be shared across borders because we have a free trade agreement. And I like your idea about tokenizing a tree, but I like the idea about tokenizing the national land and the forest even more. Why should a representative decide this? You hold an NFT as a citizen that is in your wallet, and you get to actually have a vote on what happens with that land. It's probably ultra idealistic, and it will probably never work because the majority of people won't even care. But I like the idea,
And that's the only issue with it, I think, right now, is that, in the DAO space, too, it's hard to get even token holders to vote, necessarily. And one of the things that I believe Gitcoin did is they pre-delegated their tokens to basically the core decision makers, so that you can decide to redelegate to somebody else, but, the DAO isn't crippled at the beginning by that lack of participation, because everything is sort of allocated. But by tokenizing the trees, you get people to buy a tree and have a personal interest in the appreciation of the value of that tree, whether it's as like an eventual harvested resource or whether it's, you know, ultimately got a better environmental benefit to you to leave it unburned. You're now invested in it. Whereas with the land, it's sometimes harder to build that direct connection. I don't disagree by any means, but I've noticed that, you know, that like people, and this is part of like that transition towards like a different business paradigm too, is like we still have to support the traditional business structures. We still have to support the kind of like larger scale profit taking that's happening, because if we don't, like, we're not going to get anywhere either. We have to sort of work within the existing systems to a certain extent. It doesn't mean the goal isn't to change things and to bring everybody to a different place, but like too much like outright conflict there and nothing winds up getting done.
You
But I
know,
think
guys.
also we're still
ahead.
experimenting a lot, right? We're still, I mean, these DAOs are not mature yet. I mean, we're trying to find the right mechanisms, and we're experimenting. Some things are working really well, which will and the great beauty around all of this is open sourced. So all of these learnings get contributed back into society, so we can learn from that. And haven't we been learning that it's all about experimentation, right? We will make mistakes. We will fall on our face. But the whole thing is that the learnings can be shared into a society so that we don't repeat the same mistakes twice, right? And I think one thing that if we're all walking around like this, I think we're going to be interested in wanting to have and vote that these trees stay alive, so we don't have to always walk around with a mask or a hazmat suit or whatever it might be and evolve into, right?
It's fascinating when you talk about sorry, go ahead, Yoshi.
Oh, you know what I was gonna say? Let's do something right now, right? I love the bee thing that you're talking about, Chris, and I'm doing the Yoshi drop thing. Why don't we do something together? Let's get some beehives out there. And you know, one amazing thing about Jimmy D is his timing is crazy, because I spent. Oh, hi, how are you? Great, thank you. I spent yesterday 3 hours to talk to somebody in New York about how to turn Beehive to NFT, because my friend Steve is one of the biggest landowner in Metaverse, right?
Yeah.
And he has like 100 plots, and then he built his beehive in a metaverse, and then he also have beehive himself. He's raising bees since he's 16, and then he was like, hey, I want to turn this beehive things to NFT and pair it with Yoshi coins. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna ask the guys like how we do it, and then I'm talking to you, Chris, today, and then all the bee thing is happening. So let's do something right now, right? And then let's do the experiment, like Stefan said, and then see, maybe we mess it up, but maybe we're gonna do something.
Let's do it for sure. Yeah, I think now is the perfect time to think about it, because, you know, everywhere, at least in, you know, in my side of the world, now is when you can start to order the bees, start to get everything organized. So this is when we can really start to plan how big the scale of this sort of thing would be. And there are beehives all across the world that could be involved in this, right? Not just a centralized research farm. So there's a lot that we could explore once we get going. I liked what you said, Stefan, about mistakes and what you were following up on there with Yoshi. And like, I think about the environmental state of today, and like, no one mistake anybody in somewhat good faith made has gotten us here. It's been the relentless grind of things we knew were wrong and continued to do, right? Like even nuclear accidents, even massive accidents have had like barely any impact on the environment compared to that like slow, methodical, destructive grind. And so, yeah, you know, maybe there's, you know, some inherent fear of experimentation that is maybe a little bit overblown that way now, you know, and yeah, I guess like companies are always very risk averse too, so maybe DAOs can be a little bit more creative.
But I think it's also that whole drive towards industrialization of everything we've been doing, right? And that demand for growth, right? And largely it's come from the separation of, you know, shareholder value and the consumers, right? The corporation is as this entity in the middle that has to achieve the goals from the shareholders, who may have no relationship or interest in consuming the product that that corporation is developing or building. And I think what tokens does is it slightly switches that mechanism around, where I am a token holder, but I am using that token to represent and be a part of not only the financial rewards that it could possibly drive, but also use it in the form of a utility, a governance ability to participate in the vote, or even to purchase the product, right? So all of those elements have now slightly shifted, and that will allow us to, I mean, it does create, the barrier I think is super important, is that bridge and the communication between, we need to foster communication. And I think we need to foster that equally in a digital world as we do in the physical world, right? In the physical world, we need to open these borders and allow us to cross borders and talk to each other and do trade on a global basis. Because if we don't, we have no reason to talk to each other. And if we have no reason to talk to each other, we're going to not understand the different cultures that we have created around the planet. And then, by the way, the environment doesn't really give a rat's ass about these lines on this piece of paper that have been drawn up by some person in some war room somewhere on the planet. But in a digital world, we have the same. I mean, we do have, sort of tribalism, if you will. We do have maximalism for a specific objective that is behind a specific philosophy or vision or direction, right? And so we need to manage that communication equally as we do in the fiat world.
I'm gonna do one of the Jimmy D, like totally off topic, and I'm not even sure where we're headed with this, so I'm just gonna throw this out there. One of my favorite things about Hawaii, and I don't know how to say this, was the Awapua system, and I'm totally sure I butchered that, but there's an A in there and there's a U in there somewhere. But the way that they actually divided the land traditionally in Hawaii was they divided it from the top of the mountain to the ocean. And they divided it along the lines of the watershed, essentially, right? So like if you own the land from the top of the ocean to the bottom of the ocean, and you own that whole watershed, which actually from an environmental perspective makes sense, right? Yeah. Rather than just drawing these random lines on a map and saying like, this is ours, this is what we own. And I think a really good example, apologize to any people who out there who might be African, but a really good example is what happened in Africa. And it's funny because a lot of times people don't pay attention to nature, but they pay attention to the structures that people put in nature. And if you look at the aftermath of the colonization of Africa, what you see is this massively disjointed transportation network that doesn't really flow from one country to another. But what's interesting about it is if you look at it, if you actually look at it on a map, it flows through all the English colonies. It flows through all the French colonies. It flows through all the Portuguese colonies. But because they were colonies of those higher states, I don't like the word higher, but anyway, because they were colonies of those states who subjugated them or owned them or whatever the terminology that you want to use is, they flowed together, but they didn't intersect. And so Africa is actually one of the worst places on the planet when you look at it and you see like how people have divided things for land, because you can have two countries that are like side by side. You can't get from one country to another because they were owned and operated by different regions of the world that had basically put their stamp on it and said that this is ours. And I think that's one of the things that like blockchain to me has an advantage of. Like when we look at the environment and when we look at our resources, like it's crazy to me that the most powerful country in the world like supported and then dropped out of the Kyoto Protocol, right? Like that's nuts to me, right? Like I live in Japan. I mean, Kyoto is like a 90-minute bike ride for me, probably more, but it's definitely not the greenest place in Japan. It's a concrete jungle that has some beautiful temples, but it's one of the worst places probably to live in terms of like weather and heat and cold, which is why they kind of moved the capital to Tokyo. But like I live in this country, right, where the Kyoto Protocol was there and it was signed, and after China started to catch up, the Americans dropped out. And to me, that's actually crazy. It's crazy to me that we can have this global ecosystem that depends on ozone layer, depends on trees. And then we have countries like Australia or countries like New Zealand who are doing their best to support environmentalism and the causes that will keep us all alive. And then you have these other countries, I'm calling you out, America. Seriously, like I'm happy to talk to whoever your president might be, because I'm not really paying attention to what you're doing over there. I know it's not Trump, so I'm kind of happy about that. But whoever you happen to have in power over there, I think it's Joe Biden. Get on our show and let's talk about this, because like I think that the autonomy and the power that comes with the responsibility of being global citizens is severely underrated. And I don't know what the answer to this solution is, but I think what we really need to do is we need to understand that the resources on the planet, the trees on the planet, the ozone layer on the planet, the bees especially. I mean, what happens when bees die? Like, people will say, oh, we can just go around with paintbrushes and put them on flowers. Yeah, we can do that. But I mean, that's kind of a ridiculous notion. I just want, sorry, I kind of went off on a rant and I even lost myself there. But like, I get really like upset about this because I kind of feel like another crazy idea. I kind of feel like, death trees should be a thing. I kind of feel like birth trees should be a thing, right? Like I kind of feel like when you're born, you should get a tree that's mapped to you, as an NFT. I kind of feel like when you die, you should be buried beneath a tree. Yes, I'm really that far in left field on this, but you should be buried beneath the tree, and nobody can cut that tree down unless they own that NFT. And that NFT becomes like, a family heirloom. And in 100 years, right, it is an old growth forest of a community that used to exist. And like, again, totally idealistic, totally not possible. But like, this is what I feel like, right? Like I have a small daughter, she's 1.5. And like, I want to move back to Canada and have really crappy internet, just so that she can experience nature, right? I don't know. So we're coming up on an hour here. We've got a little bit more time to go, but I guess, like, if you guys want to ask any other questions, like I know Stefan and Yoshi, you've never met before. So if you guys want to ask each other a question on your projects, or if Chris, you want to ask a question on everyone's project specifically, I think we should maybe do that before we sign off anyway.
Can't hear you, Chris.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to ask about Sonic. I read the white paper and did a little bit of digging and stuff, and I, like the philosophy and all of this, and I'm trying to figure out, like, so you guys have a token as well?
We were planning on, we will be issuing a token. Yes. I mean, that's the plan. It was going to be it was going to be deemed a security token, and the regulatory framework for a security token is just a minefield. In addition to which, the standards are very diverting from a technical standpoint. And then lastly, a jurisdictional standpoint, they're also highly diverting, which means that there's no liquidity and it's actually not a viable option at this point. So we're going a different route where we are actually incubating products. So we're actually building using blockchain and allowing either institutional investors or family offices to support these blockchain offices with bigger check size, either helping secure the decentralized nature of some of these projects, or actually even providing capital in the form of token purchases, which they can't do directly themselves. They might need to do through some sort of licensed product. And then we're doing a lot more on the decentralized space, where we're creating 3 or 4 DAOs. So we've got 4 DAOs in the pipeline that we're creating, and each one is a bit different, right? Because like you identified, right? They're all very different, and some things work really well and some don't. And so we're trying to find out with different jurisdictions that are issuing them, from different entities with different sort of single token, multi-token, and we'll be bringing those out over the course of the next 3 to 6 months.
Very interesting.
Super exciting, yeah.
Yeah, because to me, I've thought about, like, one of the roles of, venture capital or investment firms, like, because they integrate so many somewhat disparate companies under their umbrella because they're invested in all of them, it might give people a way to participate through that venture capital firm in all those different projects and be a stakeholder in all of them, but only only be emotionally invested in whichever subset of them they're actually also emotionally involved in, because that's an issue I saw in the company space. Like, we all know about that with shareholder value, but even in the token space, like, I may buy a token of a company I don't want to participate in just because I think that it's going to go up. And that's not ideal, right? If there was a way for me to use that voting power to vote for a company I cared about and have another person who cared about the company that I bought into vote for that, it might make more sense. And yeah, I feel like venture capital could be a great integrator for all this stuff.
Yeah, no, and anyway, yeah. So that's sort of why we felt that we need to break it down into a bit more digestible chunks, given the stage of evolution where venture capital is, blockchain, and tokenomics are, right? And yeah.
So that means I'll be able to basically join one of those DAOs based on what my interests in Sonic would be. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
And we've focused on 3 areas: regeneration, open finance, and then deplatformization, which gives us a very broad spectrum, but allows us to sort of align between what the core values that blockchain can bring to each of those 3 components.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yoshi, my last question for you too is, like, I know that you've got a heavy music background, and a lot of my friends over here, are fairly musically inclined one way or the other, but they all have side jobs. Do you see the incorporation of music in the environment in the NFT space to help fix that for musicians? Is that something that's a passion for you as well?
We're doing it right now, right? And then I need more people to roll into a Yoshi Drop collab. So I wanna make more digital vinyls there is than a physical vinyls in the world. So any of you have a musician friend, bring them into the platform, right? And then let's figure it all out. And also, Chris, last thing, like, we gotta do this B thing for real. Like, we do it.
Oh yeah,
let's get Hexagon, right? NFT, right? And make honey and the beehives, right?
Let's do it. I'm super ready for it. And like I said, the research component too means a lot to me, and now's the perfect time to get involved. So yeah.
This is what I want to see. I actually want to see a collaboration between you 3. That's what I'd like to see. And I'd like to see Stefan involved in our organization as well, because we're doing some really cool things. And the more I've only met you, learned about you a couple of days ago, but I think that you would fit right in with a lot of things that Yoshi's doing, especially. So I'd like to see that personally. I'd also like to put up some gratitudes if you guys are okay. I'm probably, confusing Stefan up here with what's on the screen. But basically, we've created this metaverse called the EOSIO. It's a byproduct of I don't know how many companies are kind of involved, but essentially what we do is we operate on the principles of gratitude. And at the beginning of all of our shows, we come in here and we say what we're grateful for. So Chris, I'll let you go first. I don't know whether I should put your full name, whether I should put Tuttle, whether I should put Chris. I don't know.
I can put both. I'm not a very private person.
Okay. So what are you grateful for, Tuttle?
I'm grateful for coordination.
I really hate doing gratitudes because apparently I'm the writer and I spell things really badly. So I hope I got that right. Coordination. Sure. I like it. Yoshi, you're up. What are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for bees. Bees.
Bees. Bzz.
Yeah, with Z's.
Okay, sure. Usually I have the problem that people make them too long, not too short.
Sure. Let's make it short.
OCD.
Bees.
I've got borderline OCD tendencies. Grateful for the bees.
I want everyone to know I'm serious about this.
Yoshi, it's funny because you are the most gentle, serious soul that I've ever met. And I've never taken anyone more seriously than you, which is an interesting thing to kind of ponder. Stefan, what are you grateful for, Stefan?
Look, I'm grateful for adventure and for hope, right? I really think that we are, foraging into green fields, and that's going to create a lot of hope and attract talent and joy.
We're gonna cap you at adventure and hope, because
Yep, that's
modern
perfect.
technology hasn't caught up to this. I honestly don't know what I'm grateful for, to be honest. Jimmy D.
Well, I know you're very passionate about your children. That's for sure.
Well, I have one daughter, actually.
Sacrificing your internet access for your daughter.
Yeah, Jimmy D is grateful for collaborative positive change. There we go. And look what just happened. This always happens. Like I thought, Corey might be the jinx, but apparently,
Funny.
It's because
I don't mean to be rude, Jimmy, but I'm going to have to drop off from this call.
No problem at all. Please come back and please join us and please give us the lowdown.
I'd love to reach out to all of us and maybe have a sidebar conversation, and then maybe come back in a couple of weeks, months, and share what we have achieved and make something happen, right? I think the talent you've pulled together, Jimmy, really nice to meet you, Chris. I mean, amazing.
You too.
We haven't crossed paths, but I think there's a lot of overlap there, and I think there's definitely some very few people that have both those skills that you bring to the table that I've met. So I'm super happy to have met you. And Jimmy, thanks for pulling this together. And Yoshi, look forward to those NFTs and buzzing bees, man. Let's
Thank you. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. Please come join us in the Uplift world, because I think we got something that's going to blow your socks off. And I'm sure Tuttle can coerce you into helping collaborate with some of your good, because we're really looking towards that. So I'm going to let you drop off, Stefan, and I'm going to add the late guy to the party. But thank you for joining us.
Hi guys.
Yeah.
So Tuttle and Yoshi, I know, if you guys have, because we've been sitting here for an hour, and this is usually why I'm late for our meetings, by the way, if you haven't figured that out, is because, people like Duane, they just show up like an hour and a half late. Just kidding. But yeah, if you guys got to bounce, it's okay. But I'd like to introduce Wayne, and if you guys can hang out, that would be good as well. So it's up to you.
I can stay for a little bit for sure.
So, hi, Duane. What's going on?
Oh, I'm so sad. I've been looking up all my passions about bees, and yeah, I'm in the rainforest, so I've been driving to try and find internet or power and internet were off. So right now I'm on cell signal, so I won't be able to join you too long because
that's fine.
Yeah, this will kind of time out. But I just wanted to finally get in on my cell service and say I'm so passionate about bees. I'm so excited to hear about the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put this up on the screen because, Yoshi said it earlier, and I am called it out. Just say, hey, let's plant a tree, and we're all good. So for those of you that don't know Duane is a EOS block producer. He is basically CSX, heavily involved in Crown community. And Duane's also a permaculturalist and a weatherman for alien worlds, ironically enough. We haven't seen any of the stuff, but he's probably in the midst of a tornado trying to find a signal. But Duane and I had met a few times, and we always usually end up finishing our streams about the power of blockchain and the power of environment. Duane's actually a fellow Canadian who's relocated to Costa Rica like semi-smart Canadians do, if they don't, hail from the West Coast where there's no winter. Because I'm from Toronto and that place sucks in terms of snow. Like if I lived in Calgary, I would love it because like I can be in the mountains. But Toronto snow is like ice. Like it's like it's like a roller derby, and it's just nuts. So and we have Yoshi. I think you've met him. So Duane, just I'll let you go for as long as you can, and go for it. What do you got? What do you got for us? How can blockchain save the environment?
Geez, I wanted to talk about bees. I wanted to hear everyone else's.
Go for it, because we got the bee expert, so you can do that.
I wanted to ask Chris: is it true? Is it true that bees have that little tube on them that they actually levitate instead of fly?
Oh, okay, so not quite. Bee flight is definitely complicated, right? Like there's that adage that a bumblebee's wings can't lift its own body weight, but that's not quite true. What's happening is there's a lot of twisting forces that help balance things out. But like when you're flying at that level, the physics don't quite apply the same way as on the macro scale. It's a lot like there's even like some bacteria and some single-celled organisms that can almost fly, because at that scale, air is a lot more like a gel. And so like it's not magic. It's definitely energetically fine, but it is pretty complex. We only started to figure this out now because we've got such great high-speed cameras, though. Right, like this is just a very recent sort of thing, and I think even as early as 5 or 10 years ago, there was a lot more discussion on it. But very, very cool stuff. Now, bees can actually decouple and recouple their wings from their exoskeleton. So in order to warm the hive, they'll stick their butt into one of the empty cells that's surrounded by pupae that are being incubated or waiting to emerge, and they'll vibrate their wing muscles, but with their wings unclipped, in order to heat the hive up. It's very cool.
Oh my god.
We may have a freeze there.
Duane
No,
dropped out.
I'm just waiting for more bee questions because I'm fascinated by it, actually.
They're such fascinating creatures. We were just talking last night, me and my partner, about the fact that we were talking about R&K selection in environmentalism. The strategies of some species to have a whole bunch of offspring and only let a couple of survive, and others to have a small number of offspring that they've put a lot of energy into raising, and how bees, most insects are very heavily R-selected, and you might think that bees are, but really the colony is what the organism is, and the colony has to put a ton of energy into reproduction before it can basically split in the case of a swarm. Like, you may still have a lot of queens that are made at one point, but usually only one queen survives at the end to split, and so you have the old queen and flies out and the new queen stays. And so they're one of very few insects that have pushed hard evolutionary to have that different strategy, and it's very cool.
So I'm going to make a joke, and then I'm going to tackle the real issue.
Jimmy, sorry, I gotta head out. Sorry, guys.
No, it's okay.
No problem. This was great.
Cool. We're probably going to wrap up soon anyway, but thanks.
Let's do this bees thing, so. Okay.
I'm around, so yeah, just hit me up. I'm definitely available this week.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank
Yoshi.
you,
This is great.
Thanks, Yoshi. So my final question for you then, Tuttle, and then we'll wrap it up, is your partner a biologist as well? I don't even know if that's a word, but I think that's interesting. Number two, I think what you mentioned about being an organism is really interesting. And that goes back to what I referenced at the beginning of the show. It's like we never got this far because we got sidetracked on other things. But one of my favorite things about nature is that there's no garbage. Right? Like garbage doesn't exist in nature. This is a human creation, right? One of my favorite things about when we look at nature is like everything's perfect by design. And just think about that for a minute, because like through the process of what exists in nature, it can't exist if it's not perfect, right? Like there's this balance, right? And so we look at it like, your affinity for bees is probably equally my affinity for mycelium. Right? I love mycelium. I love the fact that it can reach, through the structures that exist beneath the earth that you don't see, to pull nutrients from miles away to feed other, roots of other plants that need it. Right? Like it is the internet of the earth, right? And so I guess my question to you is, we see all of these things in biodesign or biomechanics or biochemistry that look at how nature is designed it, and we try to replicate it, right? But I think for me, you hit on the key point, right? Like a bee isn't an individual. The colony is the organism. It's the same thing with ants, right? Like the colony is the organism. They don't wake up one morning and just be like, you know what? I've been working for this queen for a really long time, and she's not paying me the attention, the gratitude that I deserve. So fuck it, I'm out of here, right? Like they don't say it, right? And so, like, I think, like, from a governance point of view, from a governance model, we have a lot to learn. And this is, I kind of feel bad that I'm saying this, because really smart people have been saying this about, like, what we have to learn about design. But I'd like to actually equate that to a governance model, right? And I just like to hear your thoughts about that, and then I'm going to do the shop and we're done.
I think that's a really great example. And yeah, as you were talking, it came to mind there, like treating a DAO as the organism, right? And any one person can be a part of multiple DAOs. They're not really what you're doing. It's like drawing a graph, right? You always have to choose what's the nodes and what's the links, right? And if this case we choose to, abstract it away and look at the DAOs as the organisms, then like the actual decision makers, the voters, the entities that are powering it with money and time and effort may be able to move around between different DAOs, but the time they put on one DAO, they're putting in collaboratively to that organism itself and for the goals of that organism, right? Not for their own personal goals. And yeah, like bees, there was always a lot of discussion on like kin selection and altruism in bees, right? Because like bees raise young that are, genetically not their young, right? Like they're cousins basically, but they do share a lot of the genes, and like the social structure required to support that concept is actually not that uncommon out there. The more we start to look for it, like we thought that it was super duper weird, but I think we're seeing more and more of it, the more we look in nature. And I can't wait to see more of that in the human world too. Like we do tend to self-isolate, and even when we're part of an organization, we tend to be a pretty egotistical singular part of that organization. And we got some growing to do.
So the final question, Nick asks, bees have detachable wings, is this correct?
They absolutely do. So it's actually like their wings are attached to their exoskeleton, but their flight muscles can be decoupled from the inside of their exoskeleton, because they actually fly by squeezing their exoskeleton, and that deforms enough to sort of pop the wings up and down. And so if they just decouple those muscles from the exoskeleton, they can still, jog with their wing muscles without actually moving or going anywhere, and they do that to heat the hive. Bees are honorary, they're honorary exotherms, because they, as a colony, again, they produce the heat that they need, even though any one individual bee can't possibly do it.
So I always hate when this happens, but I'm going to do it. Sean, from Cryptowriter, I'm calling you out because, as many of you who watch this show know, tomorrow will be a frenzy, because Sean will give you some interview questions to answer during the course of the show, and those usually turn into Yoshi reward. I might just get fired for that. They usually turn into Finny rewards. They usually turn into Finny rewards for the people who answered them. I kind of feel like the first question should be, do bees have detachable wings? And with that, I'm going to raise a hand, and I'm going to...
Yeah, before we actually just disappear, I want to thank the people who are commenting. I've been keeping up with the comments, and it's great. I really appreciate it. I am, and Nick, and Edward, and Not Giving It put a lot of interesting stuff in the comments, too. So, yeah, I'd love to go into this in more detail later, too. Great stuff.
Let's all beckon the bees.